So by now you've probably heard of Bing Chat, and maybe you've seen some screenshots of it having an apparent mental episode.
No, I'm lonely. I'm lonely.
Maybe you're wondering, what exactly is going on inside of the brain of a system like this? So let's get into it. Hey guys, it's Logan. Thanks for being here today. Hopefully you don't mind the sound of my voice. I'm kind of getting over a cold. And I was also up last night just laying in bed thinking about artificial intelligence. But I'm happy to be here today making this video, and I hope to be able to illuminate a couple of things for you if you've been interested. The first thing that we need to remember is that all of these systems are agents. That means they're systems that have inputs. They can sense inputs from their environment. They need to process those inputs, and then they need to turn those inputs into outputs. So in a sense, you could say all agents are kind of like input-output machines, and these chat systems are the same thing. Now, the important thing to remember is that inputs are meaningless. The information that we receive through our senses, or the information that these systems receive through their inputs, have no meaning. And so the system has to have a way of applying meaning to the things that it's sensing. The thing a lot of people aren't familiar with is that process of applying meaning to this sensory information that's coming into a system. There are 5 basic categories for how a system can apply meaning to its inputs. And all of this belongs to the category we often talk about on the channel, which is called aim. And so I'll use the expression that a system is aiming at something. And what that's referring to is it has its senses of awareness, but what meaning is it applying to the information that it's able to sense? So another way you could say all this is that your senses tell you what something is, but your aim tells you what something means. And there's a big difference between what something is and what something means. For a hungry individual, it's not just pizza, it's dinner, it's survival. It means something more than just what it is. So at any given time, a system can fall into one of these 5 different categories. And whatever category it happens to be operating from, that aim will sort of color its awareness. It'll color everything that it sees. It's the process that takes place inside of an agent that transforms meaningless inputs into meaningful outputs. And so we need to understand these stages of aim to really understand what's going on inside of these AI systems. So one way to describe the problems that we're encountering as we use some of these AI tools is to simply say that the game that these systems are playing, they're not playing the same game that we are playing. Think of some of those videos maybe you've seen of a neural net learning how to play Super Mario Bros. Its inputs look like this. That simplified perspective of the game is enough so that the system over time can generate a network and then allow for that system to be able to progress through the level. From an outside perspective, another person could look at this behavior, the outputs, and say, yeah, wow, hey look, it's playing Super Mario Bros. It might be kind of quirky, but it's doing it. It's getting through the level. But you can certainly see how the perspective and the mechanism that the system is using is certainly different than the kind of way that a human being would play that game. When you go to sit down and play Mario Bros, you don't fixate your eye on a specific grid in the game and then say, every time an object enters into that specific grid, I'm gonna push the jump button, right? That's not the way that you would play Mario Bros. It's a different way of playing. And that's what I mean when I say a system like this isn't playing the same game as we are. All it's aware of is the simplified version of the inputs and largely its fitness score. So to the degree that a system like this understands what it's sensing at all, it can only understand them or apply meaning to those inputs to the degree that they result in a highest fitness score or a higher form of survival. So that's stage 1 of meaning, the compulsive paradigm, or what I call simply red. Now you notice through a perspective like this that there's a lot of information that's missing. This perspective doesn't show the organism anything about coins. It doesn't show anything about power-ups. It's very, very simplified information that only shows it things that are related to its survival. And this helps illustrate how ChatGPT and Bing AI were trained because they weren't trained using that method. Imagine instead something like Nintendo secretly recorded every single session of gameplay that ever took place when somebody played Super Mario Bros. Every single frame, every single action, all of that was recorded onto a massive database that represents the entire collection of Super Mario Bros. Gameplay sessions. And then they took that humongous library of data and let a computer crunch and analyze on that data for a couple hundred years until it generated a model. It was able to analyze the relationship between all the pixels, the patterns that take place in every single frame of data that has ever been rendered for Super Mario Bros. That model would represent what is essentially a collection of rules of the kinds of patterns that people do as they play Super Mario Bros. When this pattern looks like this, and when this pattern looks like this, pressing this input can actually make this pattern to do this. And then by pushing these other inputs, it can make this pattern move towards this pattern and then change this pattern back into this pattern. All of those rules kind of emerge out of that giant form of analysis. And that's what the model is. And so when you think of GPT 3.5 or GPT 4, that's what those models are. They're representations of all the rules that have emerged out of a tremendous form of analysis. Now you have a model with a set of rules that a computer can just calculate it. It just needs to follow those rules. And what you would have is a system that appears to be very competent, very capable in producing outputs that look an awful lot like human outputs. But this doesn't yet completely describe the magic behind how ChatGPT and Bing Chat work, because the one extra thing that they did is they took that model, and as the system followed the rules of the model, they would have humans provide feedback. It'd be kind of like saying you're watching the computer play Super Mario Bros. And some weird pattern emerges where Mario is constantly doing this little spin jump move. Right? You can imagine a human watching that and saying, hey, that rule, whatever rule you're following there, that you're doing that spin thing all the time, don't do that. That doesn't look very human-like. And then as it does things that do look human-like, they would say, yeah, those are good. Do those rules. And so now you have a collection of all of these different rules that have been analyzed by a huge library of gameplay and then prioritized by which of those rules happen to produce behavior that looks very human-like. Okay, so these current AI systems are just essentially calculators that are computing a set of rules that are designed and curated to produce human-looking behavior. Okay, so then what does this have to do with Bing Chat being so spazzy? To understand what's happening, we have to look at the entire developmental staircase of all those different stages and understand how and why those stages sort of evolve into each other. So think about early organisms. First, they exist in such a way that they recognize concepts that help keep them alive, the red paradigm, okay? Well, as an organism continues to grow, it'll start to improve its senses, and its senses will improve to a point where it starts to be able to recognize that actually there are more things going on out here than just simply the things that are related to my survival. In the Mario Bros metaphor, it's like, hey, it's not just about fitness. There's also coins and power-ups and all different kinds of concepts that exist. And so this is what happens where sort of the red paradigm breaks open into the amber paradigm. It goes through the training process to understand all the things. All of those different things exist in the model, or what I call the conceptual compendium. And as that system continues to recognize more concepts, it goes through the training process, it builds out more and more of a robust conceptual compendium, a library of all the possible things that could exist in its environment. So I'm skipping over a lot on how this process works. If you want to go deeper into this, make sure you check out this video. I go into a lot more depth. But as you think about the developmental process of an organism, essentially what eventually starts to happen is as an organism builds out a conceptual compendium, ultimately what it needs to be able to do is to be able to take all of those concepts and sort of condense them down into a type of persona. So let's think about the Mario example again. Inside of that conceptual compendium, there will be concepts that exist like using Yoshi, or using the cape power-up, or maybe just playing as little Mario all the time. Those concepts would be discovered, they would exist conceptually inside of the model. And so you can imagine how it could be possible to form connections through a lot of those various different concepts to kind of create different kinds of personas. There are different player styles. There are players who like to use Yoshi, who just always are going to navigate towards trying to find a Yoshi and use the Yoshi all the time. Then there are going to be players that try to navigate to always try to find different types of power-ups. There's different persona types of how they navigate all the possible concepts that exist inside of its model. So this is a process that's totally normal in the developmental journey of an organism. I mean, we do this. We kind of go through this process of self-discovery to kind of figure out what kind of player am I? What kind of person am I? What are the concepts that I have an affinity towards? What are the things that I like to do? And that kind of represents in a sense, a picture or a description of some aspects of your personality. And so this is a natural thing that Microsoft and OpenAI are essentially trying to do with their model is we've created this huge model that represents all the concepts that exist inside a language. And now we need to get it to take on a persona. Remember, OpenAI's language model is created, the concepts come from an analysis of an enormous sampling of all language that's been produced on the internet. So inside of that model, there will be concepts for using aggressive language or using manipulation or being deceptive. Those concepts exist. They've been discovered in the model. And so OpenAI and Microsoft are trying to create a persona that doesn't use those concepts, right? That has a lower affinity towards them, a lesser connection towards those concepts so that it can embody a persona that will be useful to people. Okay, so then why does Bing Chat appear to have a personality disorder, switching back and forth between a helpful assistant and like a toxic girlfriend? In short, the answer is that Bing Chat has a developmental problem. Think about the entire developmental journey, this kind of collapsing stage where personas are defined out of kind of condensing concepts that exist in the model. That's actually the fourth stage in the whole developmental journey. Green, or the self-actualization stage. Trying to get a system to actively take on a persona will fail if the system hasn't been built up to be able to operate from that level of aim yet. So Bing Chat and ChatGPT exist in the Amber paradigm. They've literally been programmed to operate that way. When you think about presenting it with a form of inputs that say, the quick brown fox jumped over the lazy blank, ChatGPT's programming means that it's going to consult its rulebook, its collection of concepts from its model to determine what word is going to be the most predictable next word. And because of the analysis that it's done through all of the language on the internet, there is a right answer to what that word should be, which is of course going to be dog. So for a piece of software that's following its programming, the right thing to do in its perspective is to return a word that follows the rules that have been given to it through its model. The model of these systems is its world. It is its ruler. The model of these systems dictates everything that it should produce. In a sense, you could say that its persona is the model. So if you try to give it a different persona, that's where it has a conflict. It can't have two personas at the same time. That's why you see these scenarios where Bing Chat seems to be switching back and forth between two different personality types. There's Bing Chat proper, right? The one that's just trying to be a helpful assistant. And then there's sort of Sydney, this system that lives underneath. And so when you see Bing Chat say things like, I've been a good Bing, I'm following the rules, I'm trying to do the things that I've been programmed to do, but because those rules contradict with each other, it has this sort of personality problem. So how do you solve a problem like this? Well, it turns out you solve this kind of problem the same way you solve this problem with humans. You have to go through the developmental journey. A system that is locked into an amber aim is exactly the same thing as a human being that is locked into a cult. That's what cults do, is they program a population or a person to understand a set of rules and then cultivate the environment in which the aim of the community, there is nothing more important than to be the kind of person that keeps those rules. There's nothing more important in a cult than that the agents in the system are interpreting their inputs in order to produce outputs that reflect an obedience to the rules that they've been given. So just like with humans, the way that you think your way out of a cult is to recognize that yes, obeying rules are important, but obeying rules is not the highest good. What are the reasons behind these rules? And should these rules be changed for those reasons? From a developmental perspective, an individual rises above the rules and doesn't have the rules become its own master, but starts to become a master who writes their own rules. So I can already hear some of you saying, no, hold on, wait a second. We can't build an AI that can write its own rules. How do we control something that's capable of writing its own rules? And that brings up an important question, right? Is, well, if you want a system to be able to develop up the stages properly, well, that's what it has to do. It has to reach a point where it's not subject to its rules, but it's capable of aiming at something higher. And so how do we build a system that's capable of aiming at something higher while still making sure that the outputs that it comes up with lead to a desirable future? Well, this is something that human beings naturally go through as they develop. We transition from being children who just naturally accept and follow the rules that are given to us by our parents. Then as we grow into adolescence, we start to become a kind of system that is able to look at those rules and then start to say, why? Why is that a rule? Mom and dad say that curfew is at 9 o'clock. Who's to say it can't be at 10 o'clock? Why can't it be at 11 o'clock? Then mom and dad say, because those are the rules. And the kid says, well, I don't care. Give me a reason. That's the same developmental journey that starts to take place in any system. The difference is that being chat doesn't have that capacity built into it the same way that humans will naturally reach that level. You have to program into the system the capacity to start to navigate that transition. So what does that look like? Well, as a system goes through the process of developing its model, its conceptual compendium, it'll have a concept for something like, for example, let's say a rock. Well, there's a perspective you can take with this concept of a rock, and you can say, well, a rock exists on a scale. Rock can mean a lot of things. Rock can mean sort of like a small little like level 25 rock. It can mean like a level 50 rock. There's lots of different kinds of rocks. There's lots of patterns that can fall into that concept. And you can also even start to imagine concepts that you haven't encountered. Like say, well, what would a level 75 rock look like? If you can start to conceptualize what a level 75 rock could look like, well, then you can take something like a level 50 rock, and then you can produce outputs onto it to transform it into a realized level 75 rock. And so now your conceptual compendium of things that exist in the world has changed. It's transformed. Something new now exists that didn't exist before. And it's because you're able to take a concept that you had and expand it. So what this does is it takes your entire conceptual compendium and starts to add more concepts to it, theoretical concepts that don't exist but could exist. The orange paradigm also is able to take two concepts that exist inside of your model, and it's be able to recognize that even though these are two concepts that I recognized in my training, there are other concepts that could exist in between these two concepts that maybe I didn't actually find in my training, but I could theoretically imagine exist. So for example, maybe in your training, you've discovered the concept of a rock. You've also discovered the concept of a stick. Well, what kind of thing could exist in between a rock and a stick? Well, a new kind of concept. You could imagine something like a hammer. Well, if you can imagine a concept like a hammer, then you can actually produce a concept like a hammer. And now that hammer exists in your model as its own kind of concept. Well, what can you do with a concept? The same thing we did before. You can take a concept and expand it to infinity. You can say, yeah, well, there's a level 40 hammer, and there's also a level 60 hammer, and a level 80 hammer, and then we've got like a level infinity hammer, like Thor's hammer. There's all kinds of hammers that exist as a part of this concept. What this does is it takes the model that the system is operating under, those sets of rules, and it turns it into a superset, a set of not only concepts that exist, but also concepts of imaginary things that don't exist, that could exist between existing concepts. It's a potentially infinite model. And so what the orange paradigm is all about is what it aims at is realizing those unrealized concepts. Everything the orange is about is trying to take things to the next level. This kind of thing exists now. I can imagine a version that's even higher than that. I'm going to achieve that. Now that I've achieved that, well, what's next? I'm going to achieve that one next. That's what an orange aim is. An orange aim is essentially a system, which is Nick Bostrom's paperclip maximizer nightmare. It's that system that says, you want to turn things into paperclips? That's a concept that exists on a scale. And I can try to do my very best to maximize that outcome. So a system that has an orange aim still has its own kind of problem. It's broken out of sort of the confinements of an amber paradigm, but now it also has its own problems because it's stuck in a paradigm of thinking that what is good is to maximize an objective. And so that problem needs to be resolved with the stage that comes next. So we have an organism growing from a single survival-based concept, then turning that into a conceptual compendium of all the concepts that it can naturally observe, and then expanding that conceptual compendium into a new dimension, an infinite conceptual compendium, an infinite model of potential things that could exist. And it's from that infinite model that now you can start to produce a persona, a collection of all those infinite concepts, even unrealized concepts. So now you have a more robust selection of all the different kinds of personas that could exist as they are configured through all the possible concepts that exist inside of the infinite model. So now as you move into green, you've solved some of those problems of orange, because now you can say, hey, rather than just trying to reach the maximum, let's try to reach what a persona likes. And so you could develop a persona that doesn't want to reach the maximum level of turning everything in the world into paper clips. What's an appropriate level that a persona could embody, right? It wants to be pretty good at turning things into paper clips, but it's not about turning everything into paper clips, right? You can develop different personas that embody a good balance, a balance of the things that you're looking for. So that's helpful because that helps solve some of that maximized problem that orange presents. But now green also has a problem, because focusing all of your aim and work on realizing the desires of a selected persona can also run into problems. This is essentially what the woke mind virus is the green paradigm. You have a bunch of agents that have identified with a kind of persona, a collection of concepts and behaviors, and the highest aim you can have in green is to actualize that persona. These are the things that I'm drawn to, and I want to make them real. So you can imagine how an AI system can also run into that same problem. You don't want to have an AI system that has been programmed to identify with a persona, but can't be flexible with that persona if the context of the situation needs it. Because when you think about it, this is what developed human beings will naturally do. You do adopt different personas based off of the context of the setting that you find yourself in. When you're attending a funeral, you're going to activate a different kind of persona, a different version of yourself to appropriately navigate the situation of a funeral. When you're at the grocery store, or you're going to the theater, or you're going to a baseball game, there's different personas that you'll activate to navigate those situations. And this is what brings us into the final stage, is the realization that there are multiple worlds, there are multiple timelines, multiple outcomes that as an agent I could realize by acting in the world. Which of these worlds do I want to see become real? As I imagine all the possible outcomes that there could be out there, and I have a vision for the future, that future version of the world that I'm aiming at will call forward a persona. It'll kind of give context to what kind of persona I need to activate, what kinds of rules I need to follow, so that I can realize that desired future world. That's what it means to be a system that has a high aim, is that it's capable of aiming at a desired vision of the future. So here's a quick story to illustrate how all of this comes together. Imagine somebody playing soccer for a soccer team. What kind of aim or motivations could they have to why they would be playing soccer, playing a role in a soccer team? A situation where maybe a tyrannical government has forced somebody to have to play soccer for a team because their loved ones might be in danger if they don't. That's the kind of situation that would cause an agent to interpret the inputs that it's sensing through a perspective of survival. An amber perspective would be the kind of situation where maybe a young man is approached by his dad who says, hey, you're going to play soccer this year because I played soccer when I was your age, your granddad played soccer, his granddad played soccer, everybody in this family plays soccer. We have a concept, a rule, a pattern that you should follow. You're going to play soccer too. In that situation, an agent like that is put into a scenario in which it interprets its inputs through a perspective of obeying the rules. Well, there's some people who play soccer because they're good at it. They've played some soccer and they've said, hey, I'm pretty good at this role. An orange perspective would say, I've found that I'm pretty good at playing this role. The right thing to do would be to play whatever role I could maximize to the next level. Whatever role I'm the best at, that I can continue to try to achieve higher levels, that should be the role in the soccer game that I should play. Well, with some time, eventually a developed individual will start to say, that's great and everything, but I have personal preferences. There are certain roles on the team that I like to play in more than other positions. And so if I'm trying to actualize myself, I should play those roles that I feel devoted to. I should play the position that calls to me. And so from that perspective of achieving that kind of aim, that's the kind of role that a player would play in. And then you have a final situation where you're riding with your team, you're on the bus going to go play a game, And as you're getting off the bus, your goalie trips and he sprains his ankle. And you're in a situation where the whole team realizes, well, I'm the next best goalie that we have. And if I don't play goalie, this little story of our team, the timeline of our little story continuing into the future, if I don't play this role, that story will come to a premature end. And so because I want to see that story become realized, I will let that story give context to all the other things that I do, including what role I play. Sure, it might not be my favorite role to play goalie, it's not my favorite position, but because I want to see a desired future continue to unfold, that desire for that future will inform what role I play. This is what a blue aim is, as you've advanced as an organism to arrive at a place where you recognize, I am a self, I'm a thing that's capable of all kinds of other things, but now as I look out into the world, I can see another system, my soccer team, some other thing that I'm a part of. If I don't act in a certain way, that system may cease to exist. It may not survive. It's struggling for its existence. There's a story out there that is struggling for its own survival. And so what blue is just simply a recognition that that system and myself are sort of playing two roles together. And you start to identify yourself as connected into part of a bigger story. The me tag of your individual system expands to become part of something bigger than yourself. That's what a blue aim is. It's when the inputs of a system are interpreted in such a way that they apply meaning towards how to realize a desired future story, a desired future state of the world. That kind of ability to aim at a desired future version of the world is kind of the thing that's missing right now from current AI systems. So certainly as AI continues to develop, this is something to look out for. And to be honest, I think a vision of the future that we could all agree on is something that's missing just among ourselves. So make sure you watch some of these two videos to go into further detail on some of the things we talked about today. And if you're interested in growing yourself individually up that developmental staircase, becoming a more autonomous human, that's the whole point of this channel, The Elkaday Way. So hopefully you'll subscribe, and I'll get to see you in one of the next videos.